Suppose you screeve, or go cheap jack, or fake the broads, or figure nag, or thimble rig, or nap a yak, or pitch a snide, or smash a rag. Suppose you duff, or nose and lag, or get the straight and land your pot. How will you melt the multi-swag? Booze and the blow-uns cop the lot. Fiddle, or fence, or mace, or mac, or muskeneer, and flash the drag. Dead lurk a crib, or do a crack. Pad with a slang, or chuck a fag. Bonnet, or tout, or mump and gag. Rattle the tats, or mark the spot. You cannot bank a single stag. Booze and the blow-uns cop the lot. Suppose you try a different tack, and on the square you flash your flag. At penny a lining make your whack, or with the mummers mug and gag. For nix the dibs you bag, at any graft, no matter what. Your merry goblins soon stravag, booze and the blow-uns cop the lot. The moral. It's up the spout and Charlie wag, with wipes and tickers and what not, until the squeezer nips your scrag, booze and the blow-uns cop the lot. This is a poem by an English writer of the Victorian period, W.E. Henley, William Ernest Henley. He's best known for a poem called Invictus, and second best known for having had one leg, and apparently inspiring Robert Louis Stevenson to create the character of Long John Silver. Invictus is a poem which has become so well known that it has a Hollywood film named after it. But there was a lot more to Henley's writing than that one work. He was a significant figure in Victorian literary circles, being an editor and publisher. One little known side of his oeuvre was a number of poems using the street slang of Victorian London. I've just recited to you one of them. It's called Vion's Straight Tip to All Cross Coves. We'll come back to that title in a minute because it's quite a strange one. I first came across this poem in a book by one of my favourite writers, the American polymath Douglas Hofstadter. The book is called Le Tombeau de Marot, and it's an eclectic meditation on the nature of translation. I recommend anyone who doesn't know Professor Hofstadter's work to go and try him out. Let's get back to this poem. It sounded very strange, didn't it? That's because it was written using what was called thieves' cant, or the underworld slang of the time. To the modern ear, it's virtually another language. Various people have provided explanations of different words and phrases, but to my knowledge, no one has researched them all and compiled them in one place before now. For example, Professor Hofstadter provided several explanations, but in his book he confessed to being stumped by a few phrases, so I hope this video may fill in a few blanks for readers of his book. Luckily for us, Henley, amongst other works, co-authored a multi-volume dictionary of slang, past and present. Here it is. Let's start with the title. As you can see, the first word of the title is a French name, Villon. Who was Villon? Well, this is a reference to another very colourful character from literary history, the French poet François Villon. Henley's work is actually a very loose translation of a poem by Villon called, and forgive my accent, Ballade de bonne doctrine à ceux de mauvaise vie. We could translate that roughly as Ballad of Good Doctrine to Those of Evil Life. Villon is known as a poet of the low life and criminal underworld of 15th century Paris, and amongst other misadventures was at one point sentenced to be hanged for his role in a fatal sword fight, although the sentence was subsequently commuted. I said it's a loose translation. The message of the two poems is the same. Villon described his poem as being a lesson to the lost children of the streets of 15th century Paris. The essential moral is a timeless one, namely, crime doesn't pay. Each verse ends with a refrain, tout aux tavernes et aux filles, all to the taverns and the girls. The idea is that whatever riches you may accrue through your criminal behaviour, you won't be able to keep. They will be frittered away on such pursuits. Wine, women and song. The third stanza expands the point more widely. The poet says that this truth applies not only to criminal endeavours, but to any honest trade in life. So the message becomes more like a warning against earthly vanity, along the lines of, as we would say, you can't take it with you. Henley, as we shall see, took a lot of liberties with the rendering of this work into 19th century English. He retained the rhyme scheme and metre, and he kept some lines. For example, the refrain at the end of verses is translated pretty much word for word. Booze and the blowens cop the lot. Booze we know, this word is used in modern English. Blowens needs a bit more explanation, but we need look no further than Henley's Dictionary of Slang, Volume 1, where he explains it thus. Originally signifying a woman, without special reference to moral character, it subsequently came to mean a showy courtesan or a prostitute. It still retains the latter meaning, but is frequently used in a more complimentary sense than heretofore, to signify finely built, handsome girl. One little irony is that while Villon himself often wrote in the Paris street slang and criminal argot of his time, this particular poem is not in that lingo. It's in more formal French of its time. But Henley clearly decided to take a little artistic license and used Victorian street slang. Returning to the title, we come to Cross Coves. To the modern ear, Coves sounds rather an aristocratic turn of phrase. But again, Henley's slang dictionary comes to our rescue. Here in Volume 2 is his entry for cove, and we can see that across cove was a robber. Let's get started on the poem. Here's the first line, screeve. This word comes from a Latin root and is related to words like scribe and scrivener. It meant to write begging letters, usually exaggerating your woes. Go Cheap Jack. A Cheap Jack, or Cheap John, was an oratorical hustler, that is, a travelling salesman selling dodgy products. There's a book from the late 19th century called The Life and Adventures of a Cheap Jack. On to the next line, fake the broads. This meant to pack the cards, i.e. for cheating. We will soon see that we have plunged into what Hofstadter calls the sprawling suburbs of English monosyllables. A lot of these short words sound familiar, but they can have multiple meanings, and you sometimes have to do some research to pin down the right one. One other source I used was Henley's co-author, John Stephen Farmer, who published a book called Musa Pedestris, 3 Centuries of Canting Songs and Slang Rhymes. Fig a nag. This is one of my favourites. A nag is a horse. To fig a nag means to insert ginger into the backside or fundament of a horse in order to encourage it to move in a more lively fashion. Apparently this practice still happens, and Wikipedia even has an article on it where it is called gingering, along with a very helpful visual aid. Thimble rig. This was the London name for a game which is still played around the world at fairgrounds, involving 3 containers or cups or shells with an item hidden in one of them. Here's a picture from the Victorian period. To nap a yak was to steal a watch. Pitch a snide was to pass a false coin. Smash a rag meant to change a false note. For duff, we can turn to Henley's dictionary. It meant to sell flashy goods as pretend contraband or stolen, i.e. to cheat. To nose and lag was to collect evidence for the police. Get the straight and land your pot meant get the office and back a winner. This is a rather unclear explanation. It's given by John Farmer. I think it's something to do with horse racing. How do you melt the multi-swag? Well, Farmer tells us that multi meant bloody. Swag is loot or stolen goods, of course. So the meaning of this line is, how will you monetize your ill-gotten gains? Now for the second stanza. Fiddle meant swindle. To fence was and still is to deal in stolen goods. To mace was to defraud someone. Mac is an interesting one. John Farmer gives it as pimp, and in the slang dictionary it is also given as a noun, short for mackerel, which was nothing to do with fish, but meant a bawd or procurer of women. Moskeneer is a nice term. Apparently coming from Yiddish, it meant to pawn something for more than it was worth. To flash the drag meant to wear women's clothes for an improper purpose. Dead lurk a crib. This was quite a specific crime. A crib generally meant a home or a house. To dead lurk a crib meant to rob a house while the family was out at church on a Sunday. Here's a passage from Victorian writer Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor, Volume 1. To do a crack meant to burgle with violence. Pad with a slang meant tramp with a show. Bonnet is a nice one. A bonnet was a person who acted as a decoy at gambling or at auctions, pretending to be a member of the general public so as to raise the price or stake of something. So called because they blind or cover the eyes of the public, like pulling a hat over their eyes. And to bonnet was a verb, i.e. to act as a bonnet, to puff or inflate a price. Tout. This word is still used now, of course. Apparently at this time it meant to spy on racehorses for the purpose of betting. Mump and gag. Farmer gives it as to beg and talk, seemingly to trick someone. Rattle the tats was to shake dice. Tats were dice. Sometimes it's given as meaning loaded dice, i.e. for cheating. Mark the spot. It seems this was a spot at billiards. A stag was a shilling. Let's move on to the third stanza. Try a different tack. Of course, this phrase is widely used in modern English. Many people will know that it originates in sailing and means to try a different course or direction. So the general meaning of this stanza is, suppose you try to go straight. On the square you flash your flag. Flash your flag is given by Farmer as meaning sport your apron. Apron more generally meaning something like a costume or uniform. Penny a lining meant hack writing, which was paid at a penny per line. Make your whack meant make a living. Or with the mummers mug and gag. To mug was to make faces. Mummers are troupes of amateur actors. Traditionally they were all male. Here's a picture from Victorian England. Actually, mummers still exist. Here's a photo from the 1990s. For nix the dibs you bag, meant for nothing you make your money. A graft was a trade or profession. Goblins meant sovereigns, again a kind of money. Soon stravag. Farmer tells us that stravag meant go astray. Stravag or stravaig is a Scots word, meaning to roam or wander idly. Here we have the dictionary of the Scots language. Now on to the moral. Up the spout and Charlie wag. John Farmer describes these as expressions of dispersal. Up the spout we still use to mean broken. Charlie wag, well, in Henley's Slang Dictionary, Volume 2, we can see that it meant to play truant, and actually playing wag is still used in modern British English. Charlie seems to have vanished at some point along the way. Wipes and tickers meant handkerchiefs and watches. A squeezer was a noose or halter, and your scrag was your neck. Until the squeezer nips your scrag meant until you're hanged. I hope you liked the video. See you next time.